Oh my god. All right. Oh my god. All right.
Okay, we're live now.
I think we're live now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's live. Okay,
Oh my god.
we're
Logarithmic.
good.
Wait, what?
No, we aren't. Oh, yes, we are.
We
Okay.
are?
About
I don't.
15 seconds in.
Okay.
One
Yeah.
second.
Okay.
Okay.
Alive? Alright, whatever. I'll
We're
take
good.
your word.
Are we really? No, we aren't. Oh,
Yeah, we are. Okay.
Yes, we are.
I got no idea. Whatever. So we want to start with opening statements, or
Oh, I'll
Sure.
introduce everyone. So, we have voluntarist reasoning in Spectrify versus Conrad Alden and Mr. Communist on
Mhm.
capitalism versus socialism. Capitalism, why don't you guys give your opening stance?
Oh, like that.
sure.
Okay.
1 second. Let me pull it up. Today we are here to discuss the topic of capitalism versus socialism, which went through several periods of debate throughout history. Today, I hope to discuss both the ethical and economic implications of socialism and capitalism. I look forward to a productive debate with the two of you. That's all.
God.
Okay, socialists.
Sorry. I just got a notification that just in my ears.
You haven't said anything yet, dude.
So, I guess I'll give the opening statement. I'm Comrade Alden. I'm going to be arguing for the socialist side. My partner is going to be Mr. Communist, and we hope to do a both educational and productive debate with both voluntarist reasoning and Spectrify. I didn't really have anything else planned, but yeah.
Alright, what do you guys want to talk about first? Exploitation theory? Sound good?
That sounds okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's start with what's your guys' view on exploitation theory and what exactly it is?
I guess I can answer that. Exploitation theory relies on the labor theory of value, right? So it basically says that human labor is a source of all economic value. So if I have like 2 ounces of quartz and some leather and some metal, right? It doesn't. It's going to be worth like very little to the person I'm trying to sell it to. But once I like work it and make it into a watch, it's going to my labor added value to it. So now it can function in society as something that like helps people. So capitalism is inherently exploitative because under capitalism you have one class, the proletariat, who through their labor is creating value, and you have another class, the capitalists, who are taking that value and reaping its benefits, and this is called surplus value or profit. So when we look at it, it's really the proletariat who is creating profit through their labor. They're creating surplus value, but the capitalists are the ones who get to reap their benefits, and that's why you have people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk who have millions of billions of dollars, while their workers who are the ones creating that value are living on subsistence wages. Yeah, that's pretty much
Sure.
the
So
basics of it. Yeah.
yeah. So for the labor theory of value, I don't think necessarily that the theory of surplus value is contingent on the labor theory of value. Like even if the subjective theory of value were true,
Yeah.
I still think the theory of surplus value would still hold. But as for the theory of exploitation, why if it was voluntary, how can you consider something exploitive?
It's not voluntary. That's the thing.
Why not?
Because you have two options. Like
Work
I
or
don't
die?
believe
Is it the work or die requirement?
there can be no true free society in which everything is a voluntary action, right? So, well, speaking economically anyway. So, in capitalism, you can work, but if you do not work, you do not get the money, and the money is what you buy necessities with.
Work or
So,
die, yeah.
if you cannot spend, yes, it's basically work or die. Yeah, if you can't spend money on necessities, how are you going to survive?
1 second, I actually wrote something on this. Give me one moment, I'll pull it up.
No problemo.
Right here. Okay. So, I'm going to try and summarize your position. If I strawman you, let me know. If the only alternative for working is death, then something cannot be voluntary and therefore must be coercive.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, first let's understand what we mean when we say work. What does it mean to work? What is work? I would say that uh, ap- um, work is simply contributing to the process of production in some capacity, either intellectual or physical. Uh, that seem. Do you guys agree with that, or?
Um,
I believe
work.
that's very not
I,
specific. It's
Well, yeah,
yeah,
work is
I'd
not
say
a
more
specific
work is
thing.
um, work is like contributing your labor to something. But I guess for like the sake of the debate, we can move on. See where this takes us.
Well, not necessarily, right? Not all work has to be physical labor, right?
Oh yeah,
You can still have intellectual. Yeah.
but there's like different types of labor that are not just physical, right? There's like emotional labor, like intellectual labor, I guess. So I think like labor would cover it. It's like exerting a part of yourself for some activity. I guess that would be.
I would. No, I still think my definition of contributing to the process of production holds.
Well,
well, it doesn't always. You can work and not exactly produce, like
Okay. Yeah.
contribute to the
Well.
production of like an object. You can work and not
Wait. Well.
contribute to the production of an object.
Well, production isn't always producing an object, right? Well, what is production, right? Actually, before we go to that, what separates man from beast? His reason, right?
I wouldn't say so. I'd say what separates like man from like animals is just like his capacity to like work collaboratively with other human beings towards
Yeah,
the
but
greater
what
good.
allows him to do that?
Um, I'd say it's like in some part like in some part it's part of his nature, but another part it's like another part of it is like if I work together with somebody, then that can work towards my self benefit. So another part is like self preservation.
Uh,
Uh,
I would say reason separates man from beast, but
mhm.
um, well, where was I going with this? Production, right? Production is simply, I would say, man applying his tools to survival, his reason to the problem of survival. So whenever you produce something, you do it for one of two reasons: to either continue your current survival or to better the conditions of your survival. Do you find a problem with that?
It, I believe that's system. Well, generally, yes. I was
What
gonna
do you
say
mean generally?
it's quite system dependent because there are other motives for work than your own self to better your conditions.
What do you mean?
Like there are more motives to work. You can work for other reasons than to
Mhm.
Like,
just better yourself.
I subscribe to rational egoism. I think people always act in their
Yeah.
self-interest. Or not rational egoism, psychological egoism.
Okay. Let's say that's true, because I think we're getting in the weeds here. How does that build into your greater argument about capitalism?
This has to do with the work or die dichotomy.
Yeah. So how does it lead to the work or die dichotomy?
Okay, so if we understand that production, wait, first, do you accept my definition of production? Man applying his tools of survival, his reason to the problem of survival.
Um, Not completely, but let's sure.
Okay, well then, if we understand what that is, firstly, well, this is really dependent on like, can nature be coercive?
You're saying that if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that man uses the reason and the tools around him in order to survive. So um, therefore, like having to work or having to work to survive isn't inherently coercive. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. The coercion part more gets into what is nature and can it be coercive?
Ah, okay. I
Yeah.
see. So you're saying like by default, humans have to work to survive, right? And like nature is
Uh,
coercing them.
well, nature can't be coercive. At least I don't think. Do you think so?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Um. Alden, do you agree with that? Nature can be
Uh,
coercive.
not exactly. I believe like a system can be coercive. I'm not sure
Mhm.
about nature necessarily, but like a system like capitalism can be coercive. Absolutely.
Sure, but that would suggest that capitalism is nature. Mm, that's not really my proposition.
Okay, then no.
Okay, so nature cannot be coercive, and I would say production is natural.
Commodity production is not natural.
Oh, this is actually a good point, right? So before we get to production under the capitalist mode of production, uh, production in a capitalist system is probably the right word actually. Um, we should probably first. I'm not sure if we're actually going to accept my definition or not because you guys still had some objections to that before. So before I talk about like producing for a profit motive and how that differs from the natural production. Um, do you guys have any objections to my definition of production?
Um, not at the present, no.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. Yeah. So, I think I was actually talking to a socialist about this, and they told me I think this is your objection. While production may be natural, production under the capitalist mode of production is not natural.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
It's not so much that it's not natural, but um,
It's
it leads to like terrible effects for like the vast majority of the population. So like for example, like I mentioned, subsistence wages. Like Marx originally said that capitalists would always try to drive down wages or pay the workers like the least amount of money in order to extract the most profit. Um, and also things like, well, yeah, that's a pretty basic example.
yeah, but that's not really the point I'm trying to make here, right? Um, but like, so like what differs the capitalist mode of production, right? It's the profit motive. Like while production may be natural, producing for the capital for a profit is not natural.
Hmm.
Now, that really more depends on how you conceptualize profit, right? If you're talking purely in the fiduciary sense, then sure. But I would say profit is just a net gain. Like, and I would say
well,
production for
we're speaking about profit in the sense of surplus value when we're talking about profit here.
yeah, but
Right.
that's not really what I'm talking about, though, right? When I say how profit differs, I mean that it is in the fiduciary sense at least. So like money, basically. But I don't conceptualize profit that way. I would say profit it could simply be boiled down um
Gain of
to a net gain of
Yeah,
some sort.
but the socialists' contention with profit comes from surplus value. That
Yeah.
is that's our contention is not with a net gain. Our contention is with what we believe is theft, stealing surplus value.
Also, to add on to that, like it's not just that we say that profit is theft. It's also that under capitalism, like there's these things called class interests, right? So each class in society works towards the goals that will better their material conditions the most. Under capitalism, the capitalist class, the dominating class, will always work towards maximizing their profits. And there, we have seen that there are basically no human grounds that they will go to do this. They will start useless wars, like we've seen in the Middle East. They will invade the government and overthrow, or basically dominate what should be a democracy, and they will exploit their workers to no human bounds just because of the profit motive, which betters their material conditions. And we're saying that we shouldn't have a system where we are valuing profit, which is like some made up conception that humans invented over actual human lives.
Sure, but when I talk about profit, the it's more about whether or not it's natural. I understand that your contention with profit is that you believe it is theft, right? But right now, I'm not more so talking about that. More so, it is this profit natural? Uh, is is production for profit natural? And if we But then I think we differ in the sense that you conceptualize profit in a monetary sense, but whereas I would say that it is more of like a barter net gain, if that makes sense.
I still think no, I disagree with you there. I still think profit is unnatural because if you look at if you look at the very first modes of development of humanity, like with primitive communism, right? That was a system where you had hunter gatherers where property was owned in common and everybody would work towards bettering society. Well, not society, but everybody would work together uh to make sure everybody's needs were met. And there was no profit motive there. There was no
Well, they did barter, didn't they?
yeah, they did barter, but
Yeah,
there wasn't the capitalist under capitalism, the profit motive isn't bartering. It's like extracting surplus value from workers, from the labor that they produce. That's where profit comes from.
sure.
Here we don't have the division of labor or labor in that sense. But under primitive communism, people bartered, but there was no concept of that.
Sure,
Yeah,
but my
well,
point when I
sorry, I was gonna say, but so if you are in a company, right, the owner owns the means of production, and you voluntarily, right, go work for the company, you are agreeing that the means of production are owned by the owner.
Well, I mean, if you disagree, how can you just say, "Oh, I disagree. The means of production aren't owned by the owner"? That doesn't change the
I
fact that they
don't
are.
think agree was the right
I
word
think
to
what
use in
he's
that
trying to
context.
say is if the means of productions are owned by the owner, then anything that comes out of those are by default the owner of the means of productions.
I'm not
Is that
sure.
what you're saying?
is that
I
what you're
don't think
saying?
I
Well,
don't think own
all right.
was necessarily the right word. More like when you agree to work for this company, you are subject to whatever contract you signed.
Yeah, and it's a voluntary contract, so you're not coerced into signing it, and if you disagree with it, you don't have to sign it.
You're not. I don't know how to say. You're not very in the definitive, in the sense that you're not being held at gunpoint to solve the contract, obviously, but in the sense if you know that if you do not take this contract, that you will not be able to afford food, water, heating, shelter. So,
What defines if something is voluntary?
made with your own free will.
Do you guys subscribe to the concept of free will, in general?
Sure.
Alden, does that go for you?
Done, yeah. So voluntary would be done with somebody's own free will. Sure.
So you believe in free
Okay.
will.
Well, what does that necessarily mean?
Hmm.
What constitutes that you did this out of your own free will, but this time, no, you didn't?
I think it would have to be there's nothing coercing you or there's nobody forcing you into that action. And yeah.
Well, then wait. Then who is coercing you into signing that contract?
Well, I think it's Alden mentioned this, but there can be something can be coercive without a specific person forcing you to do it, right?
Wait, so
If
something. Wait. Something.
okay, here's an example, right? In physics, before there's this conception that for an object to be in motion there has to be a force acting on it, and that was first thought up by the ancient Greeks or whatever. But then Newton came along and said, no, actually, a force has to put something in motion or stop it, but an object can still be in motion without a force acting on it. So to put that back into the real world, that's my way of saying that an action, you can still have to do something, or you can still an action can still be coercive without a specific person forcing you into that action. If you look at the development of capitalism and how it originated, in England, when private property was beginning to conceptualize, they were passing things called vagabond laws, and where they would push peasants off of communal land, force them into cities, and they would execute you
That's
or
not voluntary.
torture you. Yeah,
You
that's not
are
voluntary.
Yeah, that's
They would
that's the whole point.
Yeah, they would execute you and torture you if you weren't if you weren't if you didn't get a job in like a factory or something. Obviously, we don't have that now. I'm not going to get executed if I don't get a job, but we still have like the issue that if I don't work, I'm going to die, and that comes from
I have a
but
question. I have a question.
I actually have one objection.
I just have a quick question.
Okay.
Do you believe that there's no such thing as
Okay,
systematic
wait. Let him
coercion?
address the former point first.
Okay.
I believe okay, actually, yeah. So for a yeah, but the difference between those two isn't necessarily is that for the first one we can say that there is a coercer, but if we understand that there is no coercer in the second scenario which you outlined, then I would say no, it cannot be coercive. It cannot be coercive.
The issue here is you are taking the standpoint that coercion can only come from an individual, which is absolutely not the case.
Well, coercion implies action. So
Yeah,
unless it's a
so
rational being
So wait.
or
but
group of rational
also
beings.
not necessarily, because if you know that you have the threat of not being able to afford necessities to survive, you know that. You do not believe that would heavily influence you in making a decision like taking a job. Like, if you didn't take this job, you knew you would not be able to afford the things you need to live, right? So you only have really two options, and one of them is death. So yes, it's work or die. And
Yeah, no, I have no problem accepting the work or die dichotomy as a valid dichotomy as long as it's understood in the proper context. That's why I try to trace what we mean when we say work or die, because it is key to this understanding, right? Also, in the what was the first point you made? Oh yeah. Something simply affecting what choice you make is not coercion. Coercion, I would say, is more like somebody forcing you to do something.
yeah, but that's not the point I made. I'm not saying coercion is simply something that influences a decision. Coercion is something forceful that forces you into a situation where you have only one realistic or rational choice.
Mhm.
That being, in this case, it would be taking a job, because
Wait.
a threat can be coercive. It doesn't, like, not necessarily like an individual holding you at gunpoint, but the knowledge that you know you will not be able to support or yourself or your family can be just as coercive as somebody holding a gun to you, right? Because if somebody said take a job and held a gun to you and you didn't take the job, then
Still not voluntary. That's not voluntary.
That's the whole point.
The point they're trying to get at is that if someone is forcing you to do a job, physically forcing you, then it is not capitalism because it is not voluntary. You guys are bringing up scenarios of someone physically forcing them to do a job, which doesn't apply.
I would say coercion requires a rational being to coerce. Coercion implies that there is an action. Action implies that there is an actor. An actor requires a rational being.
Yeah.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I don't think that there has to be a specific personal or rational actor, which is coercing you to do something. Like Alden brought up, like systemic coercion. Like nobody is holding Jeff Bezos isn't holding a gunpoint to like the workers at his warehouses saying you have to work $7 an hour and like watch your bathroom break and walk like 20 miles a day, or else you're going to die. But they really have no realistic option because the system of capitalism makes it so that for the vast majority of people, you either work or die, and that is coercion.
Wait,
Yeah.
what? I think I disagree with you on the notion that simply there being one rational option means it's coercive. I don't think that would suffice it being coercive.
I disagree. I think it would be coercive. If
Okay,
you
then
have, like,
I guess
one
we just
rational
differ there.
option.
We should probably move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you guys want to talk about next?
We could,
Someone said you guys wanted to talk about monopoly theory. I'm not sure.
wait, someone said that?
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
had no.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Okay,
Um,
we don't have to talk about monopoly theory. That's We can talk about the ECP.
Okay, sure.
I'm
yeah,
I'm not good
let's-
with DCP.
we don't have to talk about it if you don't
yeah.
want to. I'm bad at like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall.
You guys want to
think
talk about the
prices vary.
LTV?
We can talk about the labor theory of value. Sure.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, you
I,
guys go first because we kind of mentioned it already.
well, why do you think the labor theory of value is true?
Because
Yeah, you go.
raw resources hold no value on their own. Yeah, no. In order to make resources into a commodity, one has to, work to create the commodity. That's what gives it its value.
No, I would say that value is just the subjective evaluations of a consumer, right?
So long as
wait.
what the worker produces. So long as their labor produces something of utility value, then like
Wait, so the value
obviously,
of
if you work and you make mud pies all day,
mostly
that's
necessary,
not gonna
right?
give it
Wait,
value.
wait. Are you saying that like value comes from labor?
Let Caleb speak.
Are you like sorry? I'm just kind of like I'm just asking a question. Are you saying like value comes from labor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
So-
I add on to
I
what Adam
actually,
said?
One at a time.
Or yeah, just Colette.
Okay. Yeah, you go.
on the you said if they create something of utility, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what Marx specified in.
Yes, socially
Yeah.
necessary labor time. That's his refutation to the mud pie argument.
Yeah.
But when he, wouldn't that suggest that that the value of labor is determined by consumers and not the actual labor itself?
What do you? Not necessarily. What do you mean by that?
Because if it has to be labor with utility, then what is utility?
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. So, not really, because Marx said that like human labor, like utility is like a sufficient condition. Like it has to be useful or not. If it's not useful, it's worth nothing. If it is useful, then the value is determined by the amount of labor time in it. And I wanted to add on to what Alden said. I think the labor theory of value holds because, like in theory, it works really well because like raw resources don't have value until human labor is added towards them. Like I'm a materialist. I think that the material world exists and the material conditions are the largest driving force for human behavior. And I think labor is what brings things into the material world. And also, there is like empirical evidence for the labor theory of value because
Wait, how do you test that?
so like this guy Paul Cockshott, he's a professor at like the University of Glasgow or
Oh
something.
yeah, I know him.
Yeah, you probably heard of it. He takes like data from like labor values that countries report. So like how much labor it takes to produce commodities, and he correlated that to like he looked at the correlation to prices,
Wait,
prices from different sectors, and he found that like the correlation is like very strong.
okay. Two problems I have with that. Firstly, the obvious correlation causation, but apart from that, do you reject Marx's differentiation between price and value?
No, I think Marx originally said that like price, value was like the largest determinant of price, but like price and value are not the same thing.
Well, yeah, because otherwise his theory would be wrong. He said that the equilibrium price, it always tended towards the socially necessary labor time. I believe that's what he said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so now that we understand that price and value are not the same thing, just because it correlates with the price of a commodity, how does that necessarily follow that it correlates with the value of a commodity?
Because like I said, like it doesn't correlate perfectly. There's still like it's a couple percentage points off. I remember reading one study that said like the labor. If you look at labor time versus price, it only varies by like 7%. But labor time is like the largest determinant of prices, and value and prices are not the same, but they're strongly connected. And I think like showing that labor time is almost equivalent to prices is a proof of the labor theory of value.
No, not necessarily. I would reject that. It is a proof. It's a correlation, not a
Hmm.
causal. So I'd say that's a correlation causation fallacy. Um, so I wouldn't say that that necessarily would be grounds to say, well, this is objectively true. I mean, you could still make a case for the labor theory of value. I just wouldn't base it off of that. Um,
Well, let me rephrase. Yeah,
uh,
it's
uh,
not really a proof, but it's just like it shows that like labor time and prices are strongly correlated, and that can help that does lay the foundation for like uh it shows that the labor theory of value can be an accurate representation of like economies, and like it's useful. uh yeah.
yeah. I'm not denying the importance of labor. More so, I would say that it's not necessarily where the value of commodities derive from, as Marx suggests, or rather, socially necessary labor time. But that's a lot to say. Um, what do you think about marginal utility? How does that fit into the labor theory of value?
um I don't really like it. If you look at like marginal utility,
Uh,
first I'll preface by saying like obviously like there is some like there is some benefit to marginal utility. Like none of these theories are perfect. Like if I spend 2 hours making ice cream and like it melts, it's obviously not going to have that same value anymore, right? So like all these theories, they aren't perfect. But I think what's useful about the labor theory of value is it helps us like provide an accurate picture of the world, right? Like scientific socialism is what Marx and Engels champion. Like
as
taking
opposed to utopian.
yeah, looking at the world and like taking socialism and looking at things like class conflict, uh, and seeing like how they interact with each other, and trying to use scientific methods to explain how economies work. So I think the good thing about the labor theory of value is it is very accurate at describing how our economies work and explaining things like surplus value. Whereas marginal utility, I guess it could be true. There's no way you could prove or disprove it, but I don't think it's an accurate way of like proving how the world works, or explaining how the world works.
I mean, subjective theory of value fits in with marginal utility quite well. I mean, what are your objections to the subjective theory of value? Like, why do you not think it's true?
Um, I think it is. Uh, I think subjective value can be like a factor, but I do think that like Alden mentioned, human labor is, a source of value. One
Oh, you just cut
once you
out.
Hello,
think
yeah,
about it,
you cut out.
because like
You cut out.
human
Can you
labor
repeat that?
is what
You
brings
cut
this.
out. You cut out. Go back.
Oh,
Go back.
Wait,
okay,
can you
I'll
just
start
like
again.
repeat that?
I do think that like yeah, I like I think subjective values has some merit, but I still think that economic value is determined or largely determined by the amount of labor in a commodity. Because if you think about it, just logically, um like human labor is what brings things into the material world. Like if take Amazon for, or not Amazon, Apple for example, because that's a commodity, right? Um like Apple doesn't have worth because like Steve Jobs thought up the idea of the iPhone one day, and like everybody just started buying the iPhone, right? Apple has worth because of like the hours and hours of labor that goes into making products like the iPhone, like the software engineers, like the 12-year-old kids in China making like iPhones. Like they are the ones who are producing the product in the material world so that we can use it.
Sure,
Um,
but I believe
yeah.
that it's only valuable because consumers value that labor. They value everything. Why is Apple valuable? I would say that actually the iPhone rather. The iPhone is valuable because consumers wanted it. The, like that's really it's irrelevant how much I think it's irrelevant how much labor time goes into a commodity. more so, it's just based on their subjective evaluations, and you can't really quantify that. Really, I don't know if I would say quantify, but it's you can't. There's a multitude of variables that go into people's subjective evaluations, right? Like let's say I have uh an apple and an orange, right?
Hmm.
There's going to be a multitude of variables that determine whether or not I value the apple or the orange more. So like the
It all
health
depends
benefit.
on just subjectivity of like the consumer.
Hmm.
I believe a natural good and a produced commodity are it would be it's, it feels disingenuous to
For
compare
sure.
them really.
So,
Sure,
okay, I'm
sure.
sorry to
Let's
butt in,
apply
but
it.
like, let's say, so a dress to me wouldn't have the same value as a dress to Spectify because I would value it more, not because of the amount of labor, but because I'd be more likely to wear
Right.
it. So,
So this doesn't our ideas aren't mutually exclusive here. Like Marx like mentioned use value and exchange value, and
I
like
can't talk about exchange
commodities have
value.
to
Yeah.
have, yeah, commodities have to satisfy some human want or need, and they also have some sort of human labor in them. That's why we want to end commodity production. We want to stop
oh fuck.
producing like exchange values and just focus on producing things that are useful. Um, I think going to the dress example, right? Um, if you look at like when you're buying the actual dress, when you're spending money on it, when you're saying I want it, its value is determined by it still has a use value to you, but its value is determined by the amount of labor inside of it, because like somebody
So
had
you're
to sew
telling me
that
that
dress.
I
whenever
think
you
the word
purchase
Marx
something,
uses is
the first thought
embodied,
that comes
but
to your mind is how much labor went into it and not the product itself.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I do have one objection. On the topic of exchange value, right? So,
Mhm.
the way I understand it is that Marx starts with these three premises. So the ratio in which two different commodities can be exchanged for one another can always be represented in the form of like so much of one commodity equals like X amount of one commodity equals Y amount of another commodity, right?
Mhm.
And then premise two. So after we formulate that equation, that signifies uh, that each quantity of each commodity possesses some sort of common property in equal value. And the third premise, the only property that is common to all different quantities of commodities that are capable of being exchanged for one another is the property of being producible by means of labor. And then
Mhm.
the conclusion he comes to this is that when different commodities can be exchanged for one another, it is because they are producible with the same amount of labor. Is it Did I misrepresent it, or
No, that's good. Yeah, that's it.
okay? Now I would say that premise 2 and premise 3 are both flawed. So like even if we let's assume that this equation is correct, right? How does there how does there exist some sort of common denominator that allows the two to be equated to each other? I mean, as to my knowledge, Marx never actually provides any evidence for so he takes it at more of a given.
Hmm. Right. So we kind of like that's one of his axioms that he had, but like he said logically, like if I can exchange like if I have 10 bales of hay and like I want to exchange it for like 1 pound of iron, right? There has to be some sort of like uh there has to be some sort of quality of those two objects that is common in those two objects that makes me be able to say 10 bales of hay is equal to 1 pound of iron. It's um like it's if I'm saying like one commodity can be exchanged for another, I'm saying that something in them is equal to each other, and Marx came to the conclusion that it's labor. So like I have to say that the amount of labor in 10 bales of hay is equal to the amount of labor of 1 pound of iron, or
Equal
it's
to the
got
amount
the
of what?
same,
Yeah,
which
You
is
cut
why
out.
I'm willing to.
Go back to
Okay, yeah,
Oh,
equal
I
to
see
sorry.
the
the
point he's
amount of.
trying to make. I
Go
see the
back to
point you're
equal
trying
to
to
the
make.
amount
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Okay, I still have a few problems with it, but I'll grant you premise 2, and then even if I grant you that, we still run into premise 3, which is just false. Commodities have more than one common property than labor, right? All commodities have some sort of weight. That doesn't mean commodities exchange in accordance with their weight. Is the weight of a commodity
Mhm.
responsible for the exchange taking place? No, obviously not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then then if we see that premise to be simply false, then the conclusion Marx comes to does not logically follow.
Gonna think about that. I still disagree though, because like Marx didn't choose like human labor out of the blue, right? He didn't just choose it like
Well,
just
yeah, he
wait
chose it because
or
he thought it
something.
was the only thing that went into all commodity that was inherent to each commodity.
Well, not really that it was like inherent to each commodity, but he was like human labor, more so that like human labor has the unique quality of bringing commodities into existence and increasing the value of commodities.
Well,
Watch example.
what's the definition of commodity? How do you define it?
A commodity is something with a use value and exchange value. Like something that satisfies a human want or need and has like it takes human labor to produce.
Wait, so a commodity is only a commodity only if it has a if it has labor put into it.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
a necessary part of commodities having human labor put into it, but I wouldn't say that's the only defining factor, I guess, to make a commodity. It's more in depth than that, but human labor is necessary to produce a commodity, of course.
Yeah. You
Sure,
can
but
believe that without thinking like believing the labor theory of value.
Yeah.
okay. Do you think the labor theory of value is incomplete? Like, do you think it explains the value of everything, or just commodities, or commodities by Marx's definition?
Well, Marx only defined the LTV as covering commodities that have use value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I would say it would only cover commodities that have use value, as Marx defined in Das Kapital.
Yeah. And hopping off that, I don't think it's like I said, I don't think it's perfect, right? Like a Picasso painting, the theory of value is going to hold a lot less compared to like the cost of an iPhone. So there is some variance, but for the large part, I believe it holds.
Yeah, no, I think I disagree with the wait, what was the first thing you brought up?
I was just saying that I don't think it's a perfect theory. So like I said that like a
Yeah,
Picasso
yeah.
painting the labor theory of values. Yeah.
I think yeah, the LTV has some very noticeable flaws. I just think that it should discredit it. I don't think the value of commodity is predicated upon the socially necessary labor time that goes into said commodity. Uh, oh, wait, what were your objections to the subjective theory of value again?
I said it's not an accurate. It doesn't really help us like understand the world or
Well, it
how
helps
like
us.
mhm.
I would say it helps us understand why we value things. Why are things valuable?
Well, again, I brought up the study of like prices. Like the analysis Paul Cockshott did that like labor is very strongly correlated to the price of a commodity. You said price isn't like the same thing as value, but I again I mentioned that like price is very like strongly connected to value, and
Sure, even if
like
I grant you that, you still run into the correlation causation fallacy.
well right so you don't have to like I'd argue this is this like as an example, like going back to physics, right? Like when Newton came up with the theory of gravity, and saying that like gravity comes from mass and it pulls objects towards each other, and that's why like apples fall from trees, right? There's no way of proving that. We can't like ask God if he made like planets um if he made the universe that way. Like for all we know, like gravity could be caused by like every time an apple falls, that's just like 1,000 little fairies like pushing it down. You could just say that and say like there's no way you can disprove that. But the thing about the theory of gravity, that yeah, I mean like the thing about the theory of gravity that Newton came up with is it's very accurate at explaining how the world works. Like now we can send people to the moon because of it. Because we know
Okay, where
things
are you
about
going with this?
like the
I would say
thing
that
like I'd
this
argue that like the labor theory of value is like the is like similar to like the theory of gravity, right? It's good at explaining how the world works. Because like if we have the labor theory of value, we can say, oh, prices are determined by labor time, and
Okay, but they
capitalism is
aren't saying,
inherently
but that
exploitative.
doesn't apply because they aren't saying that it is determined by labor time. They're saying it's determined by how much you value the product.
Actually, on the thing, Marx actually held both that equilibrium exchanges were determined by socially necessary labor time, and that it was determined by the capital composition of constant capital to variable capital. He actually
Mhm.
recognizes this contradiction, and then says that he'll solve it. But in volume 3, he recognizes this contradiction, uh, and
Wait,
I
I don't
think
understand how this is. How's that a contradiction?
but because equilibrium what? Because you can't tend to both. If because the value of a commodity, he said the value of a commodity always, or the price of a commodity always tends to the socially necessary labor time, right? So you can't sell
Mhm.
it can't be tending towards two different prices at the same time. That's a contradiction.
How is it? Can you explain how it's tending to like tending towards like two different prices?
Well, no. I never said that. I never made the claim that it is. I'm just saying that's what Marx claimed.
Could you repeat how he claimed that? I'm sorry, I think I missed something.
1 second. Let me find the quote for you. It was Capital, Volume 3, page 252. I can send it in chat, but I can read it out if you want. I'll probably
Oh,
read it out.
I don't want the actual quote. I just like what is it saying?
Right. So he basically goes. You know how he says that equilibrium prices are determined, or like that it always tends towards. Okay. So you know how we're always in a state of disequilibrium.
Yeah.
So so he said that the price of a commodity is always like it's sort of going towards this equilibrium price, which is determined by the socially necessary labor time. But he contradicts himself when he says that this equilibrium price is also um determined by the capital composition of constant capital to variable capital. If
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
So
it can be tending towards two different prices.
that's not a contradiction. So when
Wait,
Marx says like socially necessary labor time, he's also including like constant capital and variable capital because he said that like um after this we can switch to, if you want, Alden. But he said like he originally said that like um constant capital is like money towards going towards the means of production, right? So like hammers and tools and machinery
yeah,
stuff like
I'm
that.
familiar with what constant capital and variable
Yeah,
capital is, but
I'm just explaining for like if anybody
okay,
watching.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. But he said that like a portion of value of the means of production, since the means of production are tools, right? They still have like exchange values. They still have human labor. So a portion of their value goes to the commodity, and
Well, no,
variable capital. That's hmm?
he ends up giving up that. He recognizes the contradiction, says we need to give up the latter, which in this case would be that. So, um, so that's also something I wanted to mention. It's called the transformation problem. If you want to look more into it, but I think we should probably move on from the labor theory of value now. Just to
Okay.
talk, are either societies achievable? I'm not.
Like a truly socialist society and I'm assuming by your definition you mean um like a real free market.
Uh,
Let's make this the last
market
topic.
anarchy.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, Chloe, if you have to go, I can get another mod in here if you guys want to continue.
No, it's just getting kind of stale.
Yeah, so
Damn, all right. Yeah, market anarchy.
okay, so I just wanted to touch on the inevitability of socialism.
Oh, the
So
currency, the rate of profit to fall. Is that?
so um Jonathan, he touched on how Marx and Engels championed scientific socialism, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, a bit earlier, right. So Marx and Engels saw socialism as uh, inevitable, right? So they observed the pattern. He observed it in dialectical materialism. So there was the thesis, which, in the case of a transition from capitalism to socialism, the thesis would be the ruling class. The antithesis would be the proletariat, and then there would be a clash between the two. That's the contradiction. And he observed these contradictions in many other I don't really know how to describe it. He observed
Yeah,
many
like
contradictions.
feudalism, like
Not
throughout history.
necessarily, not necessarily. Yes, he observed them throughout history, but he also observed many simultaneous contradictions within um, one system, I guess. So we observed many simultaneous contradictions within capitalism, right? Apart from class. Class was the main one that, and it's just, I'm using it for this example. So there was a clash between the two, which would be revolution, and then there was a new synthesis. So Marx, yes, he observed this all throughout history. So I just have a question. Do you agree with that viewpoint that that is a pattern that would continue on?
No, I don't think.
And
I don't think there's
how
a.
did you come to that conclusion?
I don't think there's a class conflict between. I mean, you said that class was the main one. I'm not entirely sure what the other ones would be, but
Like,
I don't think there would be a contradiction. I think that's the word you used between the two classes. I think that a system built on voluntary exchange and contracts would not lead to a contradiction. But I believe another part of the
it wasn't
inevitability.
it wasn't like a logical contradiction as you'd think of it, but just more of a conflict,
Yeah,
right?
well, I'd still apply that same reasoning. But he also talked about the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and once it fell to zero, he said that that would mean that socialism is inevitable. Am I correct on that? I know Jonathan's more well versed in the tendency of the rate of profit to fall.
I don't know if he said it would approach zero, but he said like it would lead to more and more economic crises, and like out of those, eventually, socialism would appear.
Sure, one second. Let me pull something up on this. That's wage formation, transformation problem. Right here, tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Oh, yeah. No, I was
What?
wrong on the idea that it would fall to zero. Um,
Okay.
so
Sorry.
basically my idea of what it is, right? It is the ratio of constant capital to variable capital, and he goes, as capitalism develops, the organic composition of capital rises. So constant capital increases relative to variable capital, and when the organic composition of capital rises, it rises faster than surplus value. Am I right on this?
Yeah.
Okay, I would say it is perfectly possible for the that the technical composition can rise while the organic composition falls. The increased labor productivity can be increased by labor-saving technology. That the value of that new technology and raw materials now used by labor decreases, and then because of this, we can see that like organic composition can fall and technical increase. But even if I like grant that Marx is correct in that area, it does not logically follow that that the rising organic composition increases at a faster rate than the rate of surplus value, and a rising technical composition of capital is equal to rising productivity, meaning it takes less time to produce the worker's means of subsistence. From here, provided that the working day does not diminish in length and wages do not rise by a corresponding amount, a rise in the technical composition of capital will result in rising surplus value, right? Um, I think Paul Sweezy actually talks about this. Uh, um,
Well,
and,
that's not what we're seeing now. Like, I don't know if I
I,
made a video
I
on
have one
this.
more thing,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
you go.
and even if Marx's theory is correct, it still doesn't mean that the inevitability of a socialism, right? Even under the assumption that Marx's system is theoretically sound through and through, with the falling rate of profit indeed coming about due to the mechanism of capitalism Marx describes, which I would still say is not true, this would not mean the coming about of socialism. The reason for this is pretty simple to grasp, right? The reality is that the rate of profit will never disappear. The only way a rate of profit could fall to zero is if all the demand for consumer goods and all the conditions concerning the supply of the factors of production were to never change. But as long as these changes in demand and supply are taking place, there will always be an altering of the production process to best serve the demands of the consumers. Some businesses will lose profits and others will gain in these changing conditions. But the Marxist idea of the falling rate of profit, uh, I don't think it take Actually, I should probably just finish up there. I don't want to go on like a whole rant about it. We'd also talk about crisis theory if you want to do
I
that.
just wanted to take one thing. I heard you mention like labor saving technologies, right?
Yeah, I did mention that in the 1 second. Let me find where I said that. Oh yeah. That's where the technical composition can rise while organic composition falls.
So just correct me if I'm wrong, but by that you're speaking like automation, correct?
Just labor saving technology in general. If you want to apply that automation, it should still apply.
Okay, so would this automation not be just another material condition that would
Can you guys get a
further
new
the
mod?
inevitability of socialism?
Sure,
Yeah.
oh yeah. 1 second. Wait. Just give me.
Sorry.
No, you're
No,
fine.
you're good.
Yeah, it's all
Can we
good.
keep going or?
I DM'd someone. I think they're watching the stream. Let me see if they join.
We could continue the debate without a mod for just a few minutes. I
Yeah,
think.
for sure, but I gotta go
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I
Good job.
invited.
I mean, I'm down if like we spend like the last 5 minutes without a mod.
Yeah. I mean,
Sure.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
I read a bunch on the ECP before this because I wanted to actually touch on that. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, shouldn't I just asked a question.
Oh yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. What was your question?
So my question was, is automation of jobs just not another material condition that would further the inevitability of socialism?
I wouldn't necessarily call it the automation of jobs, more like it just saves labor time. Also, voluntary reasoning.
Yeah.
The mod is in the backstage.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So
Yeah.
can I just say one thing and we can move on to like the ECT?
Sure.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm gonna go like touch on what you said about crisis theory and then go back to what Alden said because I think it's really important. It's like the rate of profit it doesn't always like go it's not Marx didn't say it's going to zero, right? He said it's just it has a tendency to fall. And this is because like capitalism incentivizes productivity so you can get ahead of individual capitalists, right?
Yes, but I was talking more in the relation to the inevitability of socialism. I would say the inevitability of socialism would
Okay.
only come as a result of the rate of profit falling to zero. But I don't.
Well, I don't think it would have to. I don't think the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is like Marx's main contention. I'll just switch over to Alden's point here. His main contention was like class conflict, because even if we agree that like the proletariat, like that capitalism can be voluntary, like we have we just go to default settings of capitalism, I guess, or like in a world where there is no state and like there's like workers can sell their labor to capitalists voluntarily, you're still going to have class conflict. And that's when groups in society want to advance their material conditions.
I would
The
say that
working class
capitalism produces the best material conditions, but
will still under
Capitalism produces the best material conditions.
well, yeah, because I think a socialist and communist society are impossible because of the ECP, or the ability rational economic calculation is impossible.
Sorry, I got distracted. Yeah, I'll go to the ECP right after this. But
Sure.
yeah, under like there's this thing called each individual class wants to better their material condition. If I'm in the working class, I want to get paid the most amount of money and work the least amount of time. The
Yep.
capitalist class wants me to work the most amount of hours and the least amount of time. There is still that fundamental conflict in society, and one side has to win eventually. And like the workers will try to make things like labor unions and get more protections. Capitalists will try to destroy labor unions to extract profit value. So I think class conflict will inevitably lead to socialism because the proletariat, through their like masses, because they're the majority of the society, will
Yep.
eventually win. So
Yeah. Okay.
And just
I
to
would
touch
say
on, oh, sorry.
I would say my objection to that would be more like I wouldn't call it more of a conflict, more like a mutually beneficial relationship, if that makes sense. I wouldn't necessarily call it like, yes, with your first 2 points of like the workers want to work the least amount and get paid the most, and vice versa for the employers. I would say yeah, and that's where we get like that's where we get our wages in a free competitive market. I would say that's I would say that's where we get that from, and I would say that that's a relationship that's only messed up by government intervention. Uh, so I wouldn't. So yeah, no, that's basically all.
So
Do you want to move on?
government intervention is what? Are you saying a government intervention is the thing that changes the? I don't know how to put it.
It messes with the relationship between employer and employee.
Okay, so, but it change the fundamental. I just don't know the word for it. Where the employer wants the workers to work the most to generate the most
It
profit.
doesn't change the class interest of your employer.
So
sure, I
the
don't
working
think
class-
people acting in their self-interest to do what's best for them necessarily means there must be a conflict that follows.
Okay,
I
but it's
no, go ahead.
so we already have this contradiction, right? And so as long as capitalism maintains its course, right, and as long as the ruling class maintains it, and there hasn't been like a major change, then the ruling class will continue its. Once again, I don't know the exact word for it, but it'll continue
I
its
know the point you're trying to make.
policy, kind of its principle of maximizing work and maximizing profit.
Yeah, I
So,
think I were.
so as long as this continues, and as long as the working class is not getting the better material conditions that they strive for, which is, and along with it, they are not getting the less work. They are not getting to be in labor unions. They are not getting more money for their labor. How do you believe that will not
Okay,
escalate
yeah.
into
The first principle you outlined that you base your argument off of is one that I think I disagree with. I think I reject the notion of there being some sort of contradiction between the two classes. I don't think there is a contradiction on something built on voluntary exchange. And also, as for the material condition parts, I just revert back to my point of capitalism having producing the best material conditions due to the impossibility of rational economic calculation. But that gets into the ECP, which we should probably move on to now.
Okay, but the material conditions, it maximizes material conditions, not for everyone.
Yeah.
Definitely not, because
Hey, aren't you a
have
utilitarian?
you have people working paycheck to paycheck. So there's a great disparity in the quality of material conditions in a capitalist mode of production. Would you agree with that?
That there's income inequality. Yeah,
And
I would say I agree.
with income inequality comes a disparity in the quality of the means of production.
And the quality of the
Not in the
means.
means of production. Sorry, wrong word.
Oh, the quality of the means
Quality of
of
production.
the material conditions.
Material conditions.
Uh,
Yeah, I just used the wrong word.
even if I accept this premise, I would still say that's preferable to a socialist society.
Okay, but why?
Because I stand by the notion of a socialist society not being able to allocate factors of production.
Okay, we're getting into ECP.
Yeah, we should probably talk about
First,
that
I'll
now.
say that
Should
like
we just,
going back
establish
to
like
Alden's.
should we just establish like the definition of the ECP?
Actually,
Before we-
we never established our definitions of capitalism and socialism.
Well, I
I'm not
mean,
one.
I
We're not
guess since
Landians. We're not gonna go. It's one rights, but
I guess we should like since we're on the topic, we should like define the ECP. So
Yep.
like
Mhm.
so
just open the doc I gave you.
I would just define it as like without proper pricing systems, you can't like properly allocate factors of production that best like satisfy the subjective value of the consumer.
I would say without being able to establish a quantitative relationship between the different factors of production, they all remain unrelated to each other. Therefore, you cannot engage in any rational economic calculation.
Okay.
Is that a fair definition?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
first, I want to go to like
Oh, actually, are you using Towards a New Socialism as your like refutation? I have a paper.
Are we using what?
Towards a New Socialism by Cockshot.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I have a paper on that. Go ahead.
Okay. So right. Going back to what Alden said, I'm gonna talk on like really quickly the inevitability of socialism again. Like you mentioned contradictions. It's not really so much contradictions. It's that the class interests of the proletariat and bourgeoisie are diametrically opposed, and there has to be some resolution of that. So like you can have like even if the material conditions of people are perfect, workers are still going to say, "I want to get paid more." And capitalists are going to say, "I want profit, so I want to pay you less."
Yeah,
Well,
and
no.
that's exactly what was observed in dialectical materialism.
Yeah.
Where there was
Ooh,
this pattern observed um, all throughout history of this thesis antithesis, the clash and the synthesis, right? So no matter what, these two, I'm basically just summarizing him at this point, but these two opposed things, there has to be a resolution, right?
sure.
There has to be a resolution. And so long as the workers do not get the material conditions that they are striving for, you don't believe there will be a widespread discontent for the
Yeah,
ruling class, which are denying them what they strive for.
two things. Um,
Yeah.
for your second point, the one that you just made, again, I'd say capitalism is the best suited for improving material conditions. For the first point that was made, which was what was it? What was the first thing you said?
I said,
I said, oh, sorry.
I said that like you're going to have like interests of the two classes
Oh,
in
yeah.
society are diametrically.
They'll never be satisfied. That's not necessarily true. Whenever now this isn't like achievable. It's perfect equilibrium. It's simply a concept. But when assuming we could achieve equilibrium, that's just the state when everybody is satisfied. So like workers would be satisfied with their wages.
Mhm.
Employers would be satisfied with their with their
Profits.
profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of everyone would be satisfied. Obviously, it's unachievable, unattainable. We're always in a state of disequilibrium. But um, yes. That was I just wanted to add on to that point. Um, do we want to move on from this subject, or we can keep going if you want?
I'm fine now than you.
Wait, what did you say?
I said I'm fine. Um,
Okay. So towards a new socialism. That deals with applying the
wait,
labor
can I
theory.
explain it first?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, so ECP factors of production, like without rational prices or without prices, you can't have rational decision making among producers, right? So
Mm, okay. Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong.
Uh, so the factors of production are just land, labor, and capital. So
Hmm.
if you don't have a relationship, you don't have like a common denominator that you can reduce and compare them to. You don't have a quantitative relationship. If you don't have amiss, I think is the right word, amiss this relationship, you can't you can make economic, you can have economic calculation. It's just not based on anything, so it can't be rational.
Okay, all
And
right.
I could be wrong here, but I think he uses labor hours to
Yes, yes,
establish
yeah, yeah.
that. Yeah.
So Cockshot says that like since Marxists believe in the labor theory of value, you can replace prices um or like land, labor, and capital with value times. So instead of like this machine X is worth $250, going to be worth like 25 hours of labor. And you can have a system of computers around individual industries, and people just like input the amount of labor time it takes to make their products. And then a central planning agency can collect all that data and make it available to the public.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things.
Hmm.
Actually, I think this was De Soto. I don't know if that's I probably pronounced that wrong. He actually talks about this in his book. I'm gonna quote him. It's gonna be a couple paragraphs, so it's
Okay.
gonna be a bit of a rant. Quote. Marx's adoption of the objective labor theory of value explains why different socialist theories have found it natural to try to solve the problem that concerns us via calculation in labor hours. Although the solution appears to lead us directly to the debate on the objective theory versus subjective theory of value. The analysis regarding the possibility of carrying out economic calculation in labor hours is initially dependent of a particular position on the issue of which theory of value, the objective or subjective, is correct. These theorists basically propose that the governing body keep track of the number of hours worked by each worker, and then then provide each worker with a certain amount of vouchers that correspond to the number of hours work and entitle them to the certain quantity of the consumers and good service consumer goods and services produced. The social product would be distributed by establishing a statistical register of the number of labor hours necessary to produce each good and service, and by allocating goods and resources to these workers willing to exchange them for corresponding vouchers. In this way, each hour of labor would give the worker a right to obtain an hour's worth of goods and services. It is clear that such vouchers would not constitute money and that goods and services would have no market prices or terms in trade voluntarily established by buyers, since the ratio at which goods and services are exchanged by vouchers would be explicitly established beforehand in terms of the number of labor hours necessary to produce each good. According to Mises, economic calculation in labor hours poses two specific insoluble problems. First, even within the framework of the objective labor theory of value, this proposed calculation criterion cannot be applied to any production process in which non-reproducible natural resources are used. Indeed, it is obvious that one cannot attribute any particular number of labor hours to any natural resource, which, like coal, permits the achievement of ends, yet is economically scarce and cannot be manufactured using labor. In other words, because labor is not a product to produce such a resource, the consideration of labor hours does not enable one to perform the economic calculation which is required, if any. But arbitrary decisions are to be made concerning the resources. Before I go to the second reason, I want to simplify that. Um, so basically, you know how you said earlier how the labor theory of value doesn't apply to everything.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. It doesn't
Yeah,
natural
yeah.
resources like diamonds and coal and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, just natural resources in general. Basically, everything the LTV can account for, you would still have that problem within those factors of production. So even that would be totally unrelated as well. And then
hmm
even the next one, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this, is that labor's heterogeneous, not homogeneous.
I
Um,
believe Cockshot, um, he addressed that in one of his studies, talking
Yeah,
about why labor should
yeah.
be. I gotta find the study exactly.
Wait, which point are you with?
I believe it
I
was
actually have
why labor should be the basis of economic calculation. Paul Cockshot, he addressed the response that labor is not homogeneous. I forget exactly what he said. I can try to find the.
I
Oh,
actually
even if
have what
I,
he said.
yeah, even if
I
I
have the
operate
specific
under
study.
your framework of he addressed this problem and it's totally solved, you still run into the first problem of the LTV being incomplete, so it can't really be applied universally.
Right.
So
So
and you already
oh,
conceded to that.
are you going to continue or
Oh no, you can go now. Actually,
okay?
I should no,
All
yeah,
right.
you can go.
I'll respond to the heterogeneous thing first because I feel like that's easier. Then I'll respond to natural resources. So for the heterogeneous labor, uh it could be proved like it can be improved by treating skilled labor like the means of production in capital. So if I'm a doctor and I work 10 hours, that's obviously going to be worth more than if I'm working in a manufacturing gig and I work 10 hours. So Cockshot says that um like a portion of the labor that went into educating you and making your labor more skilled, a portion of that value also goes into when you're working. So, sorry if this sounds overly complicated. For example, if I'm a doctor, and let's say, for some reason, it takes me 100 hours of uh, it takes me 100 hours of labor to learn how to become a doctor. Uh, so that means, and let's say that I do doctoring 5 times and then I retire. So that means each time I do doctoring, a portion of my education, a portion of that labor, 20 hours is also going to be incorporated in that value. If that makes sense.
Sure, that doesn't really solve the homogeneous heterogeneous thing because it wouldn't apply on the same level, sure, but I'd still say that critique still applies. But let's move on to the natural resource thing. What would be your
Mhm.
objection to that?
So Cockshot actually mentions how like this isn't like perfectly solved under capitalism either, because we've seen like capitalists have no problem with like utilizing rare natural resources or exploiting them without like caring about whether or not it's sustainable. Like he gives the example of the American Dust Bowl, where like westward expansion of American agriculture on land went towards land that was the most productive, and the market provided no incentive for resource conservation, and that led to over farming. And we saw like how that led to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, where like there were like huge swaths of land that were basically desert in America, which were once like very efficiently farmed.
Okay, I'm
Um,
not okay. So your initial point. So the initial critique I made was um that you can't, and he recognizes this flaw, right? He says it isn't solved under capitalism, even though we can establish a quantitative relationship between the different factors of production.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
How would it be a problem under capitalism if we can also establish a quantitative relationship between the different factors of production?
Because like we see in practice that capitalists um are saying some. Okay, I see what you're saying. Either way, we see in practice that capitalists can often ignore like the price values of things like land or the land or natural resources, and exploit them without like caring about conservation. Like I brought up with the Dust Bowl. And under socialism, this problem could be solved if a central planning agency looks at the quantity of like how much land there was and how much natural resources there was, and they put a specific. Uh, they could like in theory um, say that hey, you can only use X amount per year to be sustainable, and then divide it up to corporations based off need rather than who can pay them most.
I
If that
wouldn't
makes
call
sense.
that, yeah, I wouldn't call that necessarily a solution to the problem I proposed though. That would more be like you brought up conservation. I'm not entirely sure how that means we lack the ability to establish a quantitative relationship.
I'm saying that yes, there is a quantitative relationship with prices, but we can still see that under capitalism, like natural resources aren't used responsibly, and um they aren't used sustainably either. So like
Wait,
the objective. Mhm.
I would object to that because the market would punish that. If they do something consumers don't demand, then they lose money.
Well, I mean, like I gave the example of like the Dust Bowl, where like American farmers over farmed because of the market incentive, and that led to like basically deserts in the Midwest. Another example, I guess, would
Wait, well,
be
didn't that punish the farmers then?
okay, fair. It did punish the it did punish the farmers, but that could have been easily prevented if a central planning agency said was stepping in and saying, "Hey, look, there's only so much land to go around. You should farm it X amount or Y amount." And I feel like that would be a solution that would lead things to be better under capitalism. I mean, under socialism.
Well, wait, you're already wait for your solution. You're presupposing that the central agency already exists. I'm not sure. Wait, what?
Um, yeah, I'm
Uh,
saying that like
oh wait,
uh,
no, never mind. I see your point now, right? So I think what you're trying to say is that under capitalism we don't solve the problem I proposed uh because why?
I think under capitalism, with like natural resources, they're still exploited and they aren't used sustainably or responsibly because oftentimes because of like the quest for profit and market anarchy. And I think under socialism, the solution to your problem with like not having objective factors for natural resources or extraction instead of like assigning like labor time to like natural resources or something like that, the a central planning agency could look at how much natural resources we have, like X amount of land, and then calculate how much would be sustainable, and then like divide it up for use based off need, rather than who can pay the most, or having the anarchy of the market.
I would
was-
ask you why, how they would know the sustainability, but the ECB assumes full knowledge, so I won't get into that.
Okay.
Let's assume that they understand how to do this, right? And they have like full agreement on how to do this, even though that's a whole other problem.
Right. I was gonna ask, like, going back to like the, you were saying the Dust Bowl was like from over farming. Was that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like if one like over farms, right, and they affect others' property, they would like suffer more consequence under capitalism, as capitalism guarantees the protection of property rights.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Okay.
Kind of lost track.
Okay, so like
They wouldn't be allowed to violate other people's property,
yeah,
right?
you wouldn't be allowed to violate other people's property rights. So if you were to do an act of that, like over farm, you would like you would violate one's property rights, as the storm would be from you, and that destroy their property.
So you're saying that under perfect capitalism, you wouldn't be able to overfarm because, what if it's
No,
your
no, no,
own
it's
land
not.
that you're over? What if everybody overfarms their land? What about that? Because
If
that's what
everybody,
happened with the Dust Bowl. Everybody was overfarming their land.
yeah, and they receive punishment from the market from that.
Well, I'm confused about like your partner's point about like
I'm not sure. I'm
property
not
rights.
entirely sure what the point he's attempting to make is. You'll have to ask him up for clarification.
Um, okay, I guess we can voluntarist reasoning if you want to like expand upon that. I was just confused.
Wait, voluntary? What the society built off of free association and voluntary exchange?
Wait, what? No, wait. Okay, wait. What do you mean by like what do you like looking me for like expand upon?
I'm confused about your point about like private property rights, because what happened with the Dust Bowl is like everybody was over farming their land. It wasn't like I don't think that was a violation of private property rights, because everybody was like still
Well,
on their own land.
You would no, but like you would like by this action you would be, how do I say it? Like you would
be
still be,
damaging other people's
yeah,
property.
you still be damaging others' property by this action. You'd be damaging your own property, yes, but you would also be damaging others. Like
Okay, yeah, but I don't think that's like. Are you saying that's like antithetical to capitalism? Is
yeah,
that what you're
because
saying?
capitalism like it has the security of property rights in.
Well, I don't think that's like. How do I put this? I feel like you're trying to like force like a definition of capitalism onto something here. Capitalism isn't only like, yeah, your property rights are protected under capitalism, but I still think if you look at like what actually happened, this was still capitalism. This was like the anarchy of the market. Um, and sorry, I'm phrasing this really badly.
I would say if property rights aren't protected, then I wouldn't call it capitalism, because like private ownership of the means of production presuppose,
Okay.
which that's the term I would use, private ownership of the means of production, but that presupposes that private property rights are recognized and protected.
Well, let's assume that like we're in a perfect capitalist world without any state, right? So what would be preventing people from over farming their land, if you don't have a state or some agency like regulating uh like how much you can do with like your own property?
Wait, no. The objection I think he's trying to make is not that you can't do what you want with your property. You absolutely can in an ANCAP society.
Mhm.
More so that you can um you can't damage other people's property.
No, I get that, but I'm saying like, how would you prevent like another Dust
Oh,
Bowl from
rights
happening
enforcement
in?
agent. Oh, you mean what would protect other people's property rights?
He's asking. He's
Kinda,
asking
yeah.
if you So you mentioned, yeah, capitalism recognizes and protects individual rights. So he's asking, what would prevent someone from over farming their own land?
Without
The
like some
market.
sort of like
Yeah.
It's not really
regulation.
not really rights violations. I would say that's unrelated to his point, though.
I believe that was his entire point. Was how can you?
Wait. No. I think
No,
his
not his entire point. Sorry. I didn't mean to say that. I meant that was his question. Was what prevents someone from over farming? Is there anything that prevents somebody from over farming?
I would say that the market punishing them through profit and loss. But when it comes to rights violations, which I think was more the subject he touched on, or more the point that my partner was attempting to illustrate. Um, I think he was dealing more with like you can't violate other people's property rights. So if your actions cause their property to be destroyed, you would be held accountable.
And by like, wait, never mind. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. When y'all looking to like cap this?
Whenever you guys want. Actually, Alden, I wanted to add on to that part. Your argumentation ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your objection to argumentation ethics is what exactly? Hopper makes this assumption, which
So yeah, my point about argumentation ethics was that it is perfectly logically consistent to believe in violence in one situation and then violence in another situation. You are not necessarily making a permanent, I don't know if that's the right word, but a permanent assumption or a permanent belief that nonviolence is the only way to solve a conflict, right? So it's perfectly logically consistent to believe in violence in one situation and not in another. Maybe in
yeah,
a
sure, that's
specific
not.
situation, okay, so over like over in a political debate, that is a time where you should use nonviolence, but in something in a completely different situation, it it I'm not sure really what to say.
I think I know what you're trying to say.
In a different situation, violence may be acceptable then, right? When you debate once, you do not make an assumption that nonviolence is the only correct answer for all situations.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that that's the presupposition that Hopper entails. He more says that in this scenario, you choose argumentation. Therefore, that must be in this scenario the most preferable option to you, at least. And if we can go from there, then it would be a performative contradiction to engage in argumentation.
It's still how debate. Okay, so arguing against the NAP, right? So Hoppe in argumentation ethics.
Argumentation ethics is a justification for property rights and self-ownership.
Okay, so then arguing against property rights, okay? So Hoppe says it's a performative contradiction to argue against property rights because you make a priori assumption that nonviolence should be used, right?
I have something on argumentation ethics right here. Argumentation. Okay, yeah. While motivated by some initial disagreement, dispute, or conflict concerning the validity of some truth claim, every argumentation between a proponent and an opponent is itself a conflict-free, mutually agreed upon, and peaceful form of interaction aimed at resolving the initial disagreement and reaching some mutually agreed on answer as to the truth value of a given proposition or argument, and that the truth or validity of the norms or rules of action that make argumentation between a proponent and opponent at all possible, that is, the praxeological presuppositions of argumentation, cannot be argumentatively disputed without falling into a performative contradiction. He does not make the presupposition that you will always use argumentation in every scenario, just that you trying to dispute the validity of argumentation ethics, using argumentation or utilizing argumentation, is a performative contradiction.
So I don't believe anyone is fully not conforming to argumentation. I mean, like, no one is saying. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that last line for me, just so?
The truth validity or of the norms or rules of action that makes argumentation between a proponent and an opponent at all possible. That is, the praxeological presuppositions of argument cannot be argumentatively disputed without falling into a pragmatic or performative contradiction.
So I still don't see. So
I can send you the whole thing on argumentation. I think 1 second.
I don't need the whole thing, but still, I'm not really getting anything different from what I said with the priori assumption that you make when engaging in argumentation is that violence should not be used, right?
In this scenario, yeah. So,
Yeah.
would you say
So
that claim is not a valid one?
not totally. I just don't believe. I just believe it's also perfectly logically consistent to believe that non-violence violence is also a more necessary, or
Yeah,
it,
in
it
other
is a yes in other scenarios, right?
yeah.
So I don't believe anyone is saying argumentation should not be used at all, or that argumentation is a completely non-valid way of interacting or solving a conflict, right?
Yes, determining the validity of a true statement. I'm not disputing your claim of, well, violence may be used in X situation. Therefore it would not be a performative contradiction. The point is that when you engage in argumentation to determine the truth validity of argumentation ethics, you then fall into the performative contradiction. It doesn't matter that you utilize violence in another scenario. It matters that you are using argumentation to dispute the truth validity of argumentation ethics.
But that kind of that's a circle, you know. It
Well, it's a
arguing
performative
against so
yeah, it's a performative
it's
contradiction.
to say it's a perform. I don't believe it's a performative contradiction to say to argue against um. It, I'm not fully grasping what you're saying here, right?
Actually, we should probably lay down what is argumentation ethics so we can understand what the performative
Well,
contradiction actually is.
I have a basic grasp of argumentation ethics.
I'll send some stuff in there.
I pasted it in the private chat. That's the exact definition of it.
Once I have a doc on it, it's a quote from Hoppe where he explains just what is argumentation ethics. Yep, this is the right one. Check that doc. It has 7 propositions, and yes.
So I have this line here, right? And 7, that any argument to the contrary, that either the proponent or opponent is not entitled to the exclusive ownership of his body and all prior assumptions and all prior possessions, cannot be defended without falling into a pragmatic or performative contradiction, because by engaging in argumentation, both proponent and opponent demonstrate that they seek a peaceful, conflict-free resolution to whatever disagreement gave rise to their arguments.
Yep. Do you not see that as valid?
It seems disingenuous in a way.
What do you mean? I'm not sure.
It because so you have a conflict over property rights, right?
Well, over argumentation ethics.
But in this specific line, it's bringing up property rights, because
Well, yeah.
argumentation ethics is meant to
Justify property rights and
yeah.
well, self-ownership and therefore property rights, right?
Yeah.
Argumentation ethics. You cannot deny the exclusive ownership of his body and all prior possessions, which is the property thing. or else you fall into a performative contradiction. Because by engaging in argumentation, you are demonstrating that you have exclusive control over your body.
Yeah, but that is completely scenario dependent.
It depends on whether or not you engage in argumentation.
But also it's still not exactly, because if you are if you are engaging in argumentation with somebody, right, you may have the person may be respecting your right to your own body in that specific situation, right?
Wait, no. It's not that they respect your right to their
No,
your
but
right. Okay.
they acknowledge, they make a priori assumption that nonviolence should not. I meant that nonviolence should be used.
In
Nobody
this particular
in this
scenario.
scenario, right?
Yes.
Yes. So still, somebody can. It's just in that specific scenario.
True. That's why it's a performative contradiction in this specific scenario.
Though somebody can believe, as I said earlier, and what I believe my video addresses, it's perfectly logically consistent for somebody else to believe that violence should be used in a different scenario.
Well,
right?
yeah, but the performative contradiction only applies to this specific scenario. That's why he doesn't say when you engage in violence, you engage in a performative contradiction. Only when you engage in argumentation to refute argumentation ethics are you committing a performative contradiction.
Then, so the entire point of argumentation ethics is saying to argue against argumentation ethics is a performative contradiction, but that still doesn't. That leaves a lot of questions here, because if the entire point of argumentation ethics is to prove that arguing against argumentation ethics is a performative contradiction, that makes little sense.
Well, no. That's not the point of argumentation ethics. Hoppe merely shows that engaging in argumentation against argumentation ethics is a performative contradiction. The actual argument for
argumentation ethics would be property rights or self-ownership.
Self-ownership and therefore property rights. So basically, right? If this basically performative contradiction that he's talking about, you cannot simultaneously deny that you own your body while simultaneously engaging in argumentation demonstrating that you have exclusive ownership of your body.
But I hate to say the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't mean engaging in argumentation does not mean you constantly have exclusive ownership of your property, right? It does not. That doesn't mean in all cases.
Well, you would have to demonstrate that you have self ownership only when you argue and not in other scenarios, which seems a little ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, like to suggest, oh well, only when you engage in argumentation is when you demonstrate self ownership.
That's not necessarily what I'm saying. I'm not saying to demonstrate self ownership you have to engage in argumentation, but I am saying that you can engage in self ownership, and then you can engage in argumentation, and then also it's perfectly
reasonable,
also consistent. Yeah, it's reasonable to say that you do not always have control over your property, your self.
Even if I accept that, would you then concede that during when you engage in argumentation you are committing a performative contradiction?
Still, it seems when you are I'm forgetting the word, when you're engaging in argumentation, right, over property rights, right?
Yeah.
So when you're engaging in argumentation over property rights, it just means that you admit that in this specific situation that nonviolence is the correct answer. It is not.
Sure. So that's why you're committing the performative contradiction now.
But we're not discussing. We're not over property.
Argumentation ethic. No. Disputing. Trying to attempting to dispute the validity of argument, or trying to determine the truth validity. I think that's the right word. The truth validity of argumentation ethics while simultaneously engaging in argumentation is when you commit the performative contradiction.
By so no, but that's still not necessarily
Why
because
not?
okay, so if one person claims that they own their that they are entitled to their property, they are entitled to do what they want with their property, right? That does not necessarily. And then another person argues against it and said, "No, you do not have. You are not entitled to control over your own property." Then the performative contradiction is committed.
Property.
Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Wait. Property is. Let's say self ownership, right? Let's say let's say me and you have a dispute on whether or not the axiom of self ownership is a valid axiom. Um, and you attempting to dispute the validity of this, while engaging in argumentation, while demonstrating that you have self ownership, then uh that would be a performative contradiction. You were denying the axiom of self ownership while simultaneously saying I have self ownership. Well, not saying, but by demonstrating you have self ownership.
Yes, in that specific situation. But for somebody to say that you do not always have, or that you aren't completely entitled to private property rights, right? It's and then also showing a form of and also argument engaging in argumentation. It's not a logical fallacy because or not a logical fallacy. It's not a
Performative
performative
contradiction.
contradiction because once again it's just all situation dependent, right? So in one situation, then
Sure.
yes, right?
Yeah.
So in one situation, you argue and you defend your right to argue, I guess, right? You
What? No.
not right to argue, your self ownership
Oh yeah,
by
that's
arguing.
why I'm saying only in the case where you attempt to dispute the validity of argumentation ethics while engaging in argumentation do you commit the performative contradiction. Not
I just
whenever
don't
you
see
engage in
how.
argumentation. Huh?
So not when you engage in argumentation, because Hoppe
No, just
asserts that
argumentation against argumentation
when you
ethics.
engage in argumentation against argumentation ethics, then and is argumentation ethics against argument or the arguing against argumentation ethics, or is it about property rights?
Wait. No. Okay, argumentation ethics is simply like the justification for self ownership. Self ownership, it would be the justification for property rights. So it would be like a hierarchy, sort of, if that makes sense. So
So from what I understand of argumentation ethics, I understand that Hoppe asserts that a priori assumption is made when you engage in argumentation that nonviolence nonviolence is a preferable solution to all others to solve one conflict, right?
to solve this particular conflict, correct?
To solve this particular conflict. So the conflict is property rights, correct? Or is a property? Do you have ownership
Argumentation.
over your own property?
The
Well,
dispute would be argumentation
like
ethics. Let's say, like right now, me and you are arguing
Okay.
about argumentation ethics.
you by arguing and argumentation, like
By
by
engaging in argumentation.
you are proving argumentation ethics by proving your self ownership.
Okay, but I'm not saying that I have self ownership at all times. I'm just saying that okay, in this one situation, yes, I do have self ownership.
Wait, how does that even? Okay, I'm not. Wait, are you suggesting that you have self ownership? You're demonstrating you have self ownership right now, but you don't have self ownership always? How does that work?
I'm asserting that violence is a preferable um, solution to some conflicts and not others. In this specific conflict where we are debating, right? It is violence is not a preferable solution. So from what I understood from argumentation ethics, from my understanding of it, from my learning, it was that Hoppe asserts that when you argue, you are making a priori assumption that nonviolence is a preferable solution to conflict. And then my refutation was that it's perfectly logically consistent for one to believe in non-violence in one situation and violence in another.
And again, I'm going
So
to.
maybe I had a misunderstanding of, or I just didn't read enough into what argumentation fully entailed, but I still fail to see what you're trying
The
to get at
point, yeah,
here.
no, the point I am attempting to make here is that you only engage in this performative contradiction when attempting to dispute the validity of argumentation ethics while simultaneously engaging in argumentation. That is the.
Yeah.
However, when you engage in like violence in some other scenario that doesn't have to do with argumentation ethics, like let's say it doesn't matter actually, that would not be a performative contradiction. You are not attempting to dispute the validity of argumentation ethics while engaging in argumentation.
See, the point you're making with argumentation ethics is you're saying argumentation ethics is about argumentation ethics.
Wait,
That is what I'm understanding from what you're saying right here. That it's a
yes,
performative
argumentation
contradiction.
ethics is about argumentation ethics.
Well, I meant that in a different way. I meant argumentation ethics, like Hoppe's argumentation ethics, is about itself. Like that to
what?
debate your summary of what, I don't know if it's in your Google Doc, whatever you're reading off of right now. You were saying that argumentation ethics is saying that arguing against argumentation ethics is a performative contradiction, which is not what it's about.
Correct.
It's about private property rights.
Well, it's the justification for self-ownership. It simply
Yeah, not about
recognizes. It simply recognizes that arguing against it or engaging in argumentation to dispute it is a performative contradiction.
Because you were
Well,
like
my question
Yep.
is, if we were to accept the argumentation ethics like prove self-ownership, how do you make the jump from self-ownership to private property right?
Oh, I actually have something on this. Give me 1 second. Da, 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 da.
Because like, as I'm sure you know, like socialists like support personal property, just not ownership of the means of production.
I reject the distinction between personal and private property on the basis of the homesteading principle. Oh, it's not here. No. Yeah, right here, right. So, the right to property arises when the self-owner comes to own what is other than than their self. The way an individual comes to own in all manners of justifying ownership are enabled by the intent of the individual to own, which is justified by the homesteading principle. An individual holds the same right to possess and use the object that they own. That more gets into how do we come to own ourselves, and is that also applicable to private property? And I would say yes, through the Lockean principle of homesteading.
Could you expand upon that? I'm still a bit confused.
Actually, I have a really good article on that, on what homesteading is. It's basically just like mixing your labor with some unowned property. 1 second.
Okay.
How we come to own ourselves. That's what the article is called. It's by Stephen Kinsella.
Could you explain like how self-ownership directly leads to like ownership of property again?
It's more so that like the justification for how we come to own ourselves is also applicable to property.
So you said you reject the difference between private and personal property,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, but more so on the basis of we come to own them both through the same principle, the homesteading principle.
So because we come to own both forms of property through the same principle, does that make them both one property? Why
No,
are
no,
one
no.
kind of
I'm not.
property?
Wait, I'm not saying that.
Because
They're
you're
like,
rejecting the distinction between personal and private property because they come to be through one principle, right?
yes.
Okay, so just because they come to be through one principle, how does that mean that they are not distinctive forms of property?
You know what? Sure. I concede. Personal and private property are different.
Okay.
Right. I guess. You want to go on it for like 5 more minutes? Like,
sure. I can explain homesteading.
okay.
Actually, I'll send the article if you guys want to look more into it through first use.
I'll just explain like I'll explain like why we think personal and private property, like private property shouldn't be owned, because I have a video on this actually. Marx originally said that like when we were moving away from primitive communism and classes started to develop, like in slave societies and in feudalism and now in capitalism, like the dominating class was always the class that had ownership of the means of production, because the means of ownership of the means of production is an expression of power. So if I own like the land that my feudal serfs have to work on, and let's say I have like a sufficient way of protecting my private property rights, which would be the state, or like the state with like a standing army, then I have a lot of power in saying you have to work this amount of time, and you have to give me this amount of surplus that you produce. And the reason we don't want that, and we want property to own in common, is so we can get rid of that like sort of hierarchical structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably just revert back to my argument on voluntary exchange, but we already talked about this in the beginning of the live.
Okay.
But I think we should probably end now.
Yeah.
You guys have I don't have a closing statement prepared. Do you guys?
I don't.
All right. Well, thanks.
Capitalism
think
bad, socialism good.
Everyone.
All right. I just want to thank everyone.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
I thought it was,
You guys.
it was a good debate.
discussion. This was a good discussion.
Yeah, it was. I think so. It's definitely productive. Voluntary exclusion. You can
Yeah.
end the live now.
Okay. Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.
Yeah.
Real
Alright, see you
quick
guys.
though,